Good afternoon, EDH enthusiasts. I'm the Planeswalker Project, and welcome to a Commander Deck Tech. One of the most notorious commanders of the last few months has been Voja, Jaws of the Conclave, a 5/5 wolf with Vigilance, Trample, and Ward 3. Whenever Voja attacks, you put X +1/+1 counters onto each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control. You then draw a card for each wolf you control. Voja is a brutally powerful commander that opens the door to a lot of synergies. Besides being a large and resilient threat on its own, it offers a unique dual kindred synergy between elves and wolves. These two creature types have had some symbiotic support throughout the years, but I think the best way to approach this deck is to go with a classic Elfball, with a few cards here and there to give us some wolf tokens. We will always draw at least one card off of Voja's attack trigger, since Voja is himself a wolf. Voja's two attack triggers are also remarkably powerful, and something that is often overlooked is how abilities can scale with your board state. With Voja, each creature you control gets a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the number of elves you control. If we go heavy with elves, we will get a lot more counters put onto each creature we control, which also includes Voja. Our strategy will be broken down into 4 parts. We're going to be getting an army of elves and elf tokens, giving us a wide enough spread of creatures with which we can go on the offensive with. These creatures do not have to be attacking in order to benefit from Voja's counter distribution, and so we can leave some open to block any retaliatory strikes against us. We have a few select cards that are in the deck keen on making wolves, and I deliberately made a point to include cards that would synergize with our other cards. Yes, we want to produce wolf tokens so that Voja draws us cards, but I do not simply want to cram in random wolves for the sake of making wolves for Voja's impact. We also have the potential to grow huge with our +1/+1 counters, and so we will explore some synergies within that strategy as we build up our board state with huge creatures. Lastly, we will look at some of the ways our deck will secure the win. So our first section could be summed up by just adding in all of the best elves for ground support. Elves are some of the best mana producers in the game, and so naturally we want our usual assortment of 1-drop mana dorks. These can not only help turbo out Voja, but when we begin to attack with him, we will get counters just for having our mana dorks in play. We also have several mana dorks that produce mana that scales quite nicely the later we cast them. Cards like Priest of Titania, Elvish Archdruid, Circle of Dreams Druid, and then Marrowin the Nurturer are great to have in play as we begin dropping more elves in, as they'll begin to produce us more and more mana. Rishkar Pima Renegade can turn any creature we control with a counter on it into a mana dork, so this gives even more value to Voja giving out +1/+1 counters. Once Voja is in play and is giving out counters, not only can we use our swole creatures for attacking, but we can use them to make an explosion of mana. We also want elves who produce us creature tokens. For this, we have Wolf Skull Shaman, who has kinship. At the beginning of our upkeep, we may look at the top card of our library. If it shares a creature type with the Shaman, you can reveal it and create a 2/2 wolf token. This gives us great value from Voja, as each wolf we produce gains us 1 more card drawn off of the Voja attack trigger. Imperious Perfect is a classic elf lord that gives all of our elves a static buff of +1/+1, and then for 1 green mana, we can tap the Imperious Perfect to create a 1/1 elf. Lizalana Huntmaster gives us a 1/1 elf whenever we cast an elf spell, which is pretty neat. Considering we have nearly 30 elf creatures in the deck, we'd be hard-pressed to not get value out of this. Elvish Warmaster gives us an additional elf whenever we have elves enter. It only triggers once per turn, but it's still extremely useful. Finally, for 7 mana, we can give all of our elves +2/+2 and Death Touch until the end of turn. This can be very relevant should we have excess mana to use, and we can then sink it into this a few times to really bulk up our board state. Galadriel Brigade is a very interesting card. It has squad for 1 and 1 green, and so for each time that we pay that squad cost, we get an additional token copy of it as the original enters. This card comes with simply a static anthem effect of giving our elves +1/+1. If we get multiple copies of this card into play, those anthems will add up very quickly. Risk the Redeemed is an oldie but a goodie and can give us a 1/1 elf for 3 mana. His second ability can be game ending once we have enough tokens in play, giving us an entire set of tokens to match the ones we already have. We also have key cards like Elvish Promenade, Elvish Ambush, and Galadriel Ambush, which each give us extra elves. The former two gives us elves based on the elves we already control, while the Ambush gives us elves based on our attacking creatures, and then does some fun fog style effects to protect our elves. Our next section will cover the wolves that we create, since we will draw more cards while Voja is out. I didn't go as ham with the wolves as I did the elves, and I think that I prefer the value we get off of going a more traditional elf route and using the wolves as incidental value. We already spoke once about the Wolf Skull Shaman, who potentially gives us a 2/2 wolf whenever we reveal an elf creature. Considering the majority of this deck's creatures are elves, we might net one wolf per turn off this more often than not. Nightpack Ambusher is a 4/4 for 4 with flash. This good boy comes with an anthem effect of its own, giving both wolves and werewolves we control +1/+1. But a unique ability, at the beginning of your end step, if you did not cast a spell this turn, you create a 2/2 wolf. This works nicely in here, as eventually you might find it more optimal to use your board state to activate abilities and push forward, than develop your board with more spells. You can also play proactively into this ability and hold off your spells for a turn for the sake of getting another wolf. Ren's Run Packmaster requires that you champion an elf, which you can do so with something as little as a token, to get a 5/5 that gives all of your wolves you control Death Touch. You can also pay 3 mana to create a 2/2 wolf, which also will have Death Touch. This synergizes very nicely with the next card, Master of the Wild Hunt, who is one of the very few non-elf and non-wolf creatures in the deck. For 4 mana, you get a 3/3 that gets you a 2/2 wolf during your upkeep. You can also tap the Master of the Wild Hunt and tap all untapped wolves you control. Each wolf that you tap this way deals damage equal to its power to a target creature, and then that creature deals damage equal to its power, divided as its controller chooses among any number of those wolves. One of the recent rulings I learned about this card is that you unfortunately can only really use this ability to take on one target creature an opponent controls. For years, I thought that you could use your pack of wolves to take on multiple creatures and give them Death Touch and wipe out a lot of creatures. I promise I'm not bad at this game. Hollowhenge Overlord is a 4/4 with 6 mana for flash. At the beginning of your upkeep, for each creature you control that's either a wolf or a werewolf, you create a 2/2 wolf. That is amazing value, as even just having this creature in play will net you 1 wolf. The more the merrier, and this will help Voja's attack trigger scale even further. Feed the Pack is a 6 mana enchantment that lets you sacrifice a creature during your end step to create 2/2 wolves equal to the toughness of the sacrificed creature. If you've bulked up a creature with Voja's counters, you can sacrifice that creature to create more wolves, and then pivot to extra card draws off of that wolf because of Voja's ability. Wolfcaller's Howl is a 4-drop enchantment that at the beginning of your upkeep you create X 2/2 wolves, where X is the number of opponents with 4 or more cards in their hand. This will present opponents with a dilemma. They either hold up answers and maintain a healthy hand size, giving you more wolves in the process, or they drop as many cards as they can from their hand, so you have less of a risk of something existing in hand to impact your board state. Our next section will be our counter synergies, as we have plenty of +1/+1 counters to go around. We've already discussed Rishkar and his ability to turn any creature with a counter on it into a mana dork. The Gyre Sage synergizes very nicely with +1/+1 counters, having Evolve on it right out the gate. This can organically grow the +1/+1 counters on them, but we can also dump counters onto it with Voja, and the more counters that we have, the more green mana that the Gyre Sage produces. Marwyn the Nurturer is another one to mention, getting a +1/+1 counter on her whenever we have an elf enter. We can then tap Marwyn to get green mana equal to its power. This works out slightly nicer than the Gyre Sage, as the Gyre Sage needs at least 1 +1/+1 counter on them to do anything, whereas Marwyn can just start tapping for mana even without any counters. Shalayan Halar is one of our win conditions and is a 3/3 Angel Elf with Flying and Vigilance. Their ability triggers whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters onto a creature you control, letting Shalayan Halar deal that much damage to a target opponent. So say you have 5 creatures and put 5 +1/+1 counters onto each of them using Voja's attack trigger. This will give you 25 damage to deal to an opponent, and because those 5 creatures each trigger Shalayan Halar separately, you can deal the damage in 5 increments of 5 damage. Inspiring Call is a nice card draw spell that gives our creatures with +1/+1 counters on them extra relevance, drawing you a card for each of them and then giving them indestructible until the end of turn. The Ozolith is a very valuable artifact to have in play for when the inevitable board wipe comes along. Normally, +1/+1 counters just poof upon the creature they're on leaving the battlefield. With the Ozolith in play, you can move all of those counters onto the Ozolith to bank on them until your next combat step, where you can then move them to whatever target creature you choose. Lastly, let's discuss how this deck wins. We're on an aggro strategy to dump as many elves onto the battlefield as we can, but in addition to the cards we've already touched upon so far, we have plenty of others in the 99. Shalayan Halar offers us some burn potential, synergizing with all those +1/+1 counters Voja hands out, potentially giving us some quick paths to close games. Elvis Champion gives all elves +1/+1 and Forest Walk. This combos nicely with Yavimaya, the Cradle of Growth, which turns all of your lands and all of everyone's lands into forests, which now makes all of your elves unblockable. Izuri, Renegade Leader, is a 2/2 elf warrior with 2 abilities. You can pay 1 green to regenerate another target elf. But more importantly, you can pay 5 mana to give all of your elves +3/+3 and trample until the end of turn. If you pay an additional 5 mana, you can do it again. This can be great mana sink to bulk up your elves and give them trample to close out the game. Allosaurus Shepherd is a 1/1 for 1 that can't be countered. Your green spells are also uncounterable. You can also pay 6 mana to make each elf you control have base power 5/5 and become part dinosaur until the end of turn. Rar. This doesn't give them trample, but being base power and toughness 5/5 means they're way larger creatures even before Voja gives them those +1/+1 counters. Maskwood Nexus, while not a win condition in itself, is useful to make all of our elves into wolves and all of our wolves into elves, making Voja's ability far more useful. You can also pay 3 to make a 2/2 blue shapeshifter with Changeling, aka a 2/2 blue elf, wolf, bunny, mercenary, squirrel detective. Epic Struggle wins us the game if we control 20 or more creatures, which, being a token deck of sorts, makes this very achievable. Impact Tremors is a card that I feel needs to be in every token deck in red. As a 2-drop enchantment, whenever a creature enters, each opponent loses 1 life. This is huge as we can churn out dozens of tokens in this deck with minimal effort, and since this hits each opponent, that will add up very quickly. Mael's Aria is a 3 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can put +1/+1 counter onto each creature you control if you control a creature with power 5 or greater. Then, you gain 10 life if you control a creature with power 10 or greater. Then you win the game if you control a creature with power 20 or greater. This is brutal, as you can really easily bulk up a creature to have 20 power. Now, this deck is rather straightforward, and while Voja does need other things in play in order to do things, this is still strong. Elf decks are one of the stronger creature types in Commander, and so these creatures synergize very easily with one another. You want to get your dorks out, you want to get your elf creatures rolling. You create a few wolves here and there, and then get the card draw going to refill your hand. But your goal here is to really overwhelm the opponent with elves. For the complete deck list, you can check the Moxfield link in the description of this video. I hope you enjoyed our look at Voja, Jaws of the Conclave. If you did, likes and shares are the best way to help support the channel. If you're new here, subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thank you as always for hanging out with us today, and I'll catch you all next time.